law enforcement pulling you away, kicking and screaming from your parents, and taking you out to what you thought was a very wicked place. To all of us, with our mentality, we thought it was religious persecution.
Yeah.
They were here to destroy our religion, and only confirmed our faith in Warren, because he told us the world wants to come against you. They want to destroy you. They want to take you away, indoctrinate you in their ways. And then they came. They took us away.
People are probably thinking, yeah, go get the kids. We need to save the kids. But we're not actually thinking about what that means to the kids who are being separated from their families.
It's a different thing when you have people you think want you dead and are persecuting you that come and take you away from your parents and put you in a place that is so foreign to anything you've ever seen in your life. And that's what made it so traumatic to everyone. So when the police are coming to breach, then everyone on the land and all the children in the different shelters are terrified that God's going to reject us if the police get on the temple lot or into the temple.
Hey, my name is Shelise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you want to see our faces, go to our YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness. It would mean the world if you could like and subscribe. I think by the time this comes out, we will have hit 200K, and that's so exciting. I'm thrilled and honored that you guys are willing to support and come along this journey with us. I can't believe it. Hasn't even been 2 years yet, so this is wild, and we're just so happy and honored to be able to platform all of these guests and have them be able to tell their stories with you so that everyone can become more aware of these groups, these high control groups, the manipulation tactics, and the patterns. Today's guest, I was very excited to be connected to him through Sam and Melissa from Growing Up in Polygamy. I totally swiped their guest when I saw him on their channel. He just came out with a book called Texas Raid, My Experience of the Texas Raid on the YFZ Ranch. And you may be familiar with the documentary Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey. He is from that fundamentalist sect of Mormonism called the FLDS, run by Rulon Jeffs, who is currently in prison. So he is actually Rulon Jeffs' son, and we're going to talk about all of the perspectives that he had growing up of his dad and what it was like being at the Texas temple when the raid happened at the Texas Ranch, what that was like for all of the kids who were taken away from their homes, and then now the prophecies that are continuing to come from prison from Rulon Jeffs that are all in his book. Everyone go get it. Thank you so much for joining us, Ammon Jeffs.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. You're the 10th child from the second wife, and as far as we know, he had up to, or has up to, 78 wives?
Correct. Yes, he does. Or did.
Yeah, I feel like they're dropping off. We've interviewed one of his ex-wives, Brielle. That was such a harrowing story. And it seems like every story that I hear just gets a little bit more intense. And after reading your book, I was like, holy cow, we have so much to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You went through so much. It's honestly incredible. I can't wait to get into it. So let's just get started. Is there anything that you wanted to say before we start?
Not particularly. I'm ready.
Okay, he's ready. All right, so let's start with your childhood, the obvious. What was it like being the son to Rulon Jeffs?
When I was a young fellow, then he was just an elder in the church. He didn't have any high office. I'm talking 4, 5, 6 years old. And at first, he didn't sit on the stand at meeting. So I remember as a young boy, him just being another elder in the church. Although he did have a lot to do with his father because of the school. Especially around the time I was 5 years old, he began talking a lot in the meetings for his father instead of his father actually giving sermons, especially if it was a change in the church, a greater requirement usually, or a teaching on a particular subject that he wanted to bring out. He began to use my father instead of other men who were high in the church.
And to clarify, your dad's dad, your father's father, is Rulon, who was the prophet at the time.
Yes, Rulon was the prophet, leader of the FLDS when I was born.
Okay.
Till I was 12 years old.
And Rulon had quite a few wives.
Yes, and I'm not sure the number, but I know quite a few of them ended up being... My father married quite a few of his wives after he died.
Right, which what was everyone thinking when that happened? Because that was like his stepmoms or moms, but then they became his wives?
Yes. Well, a few years before he actually became the prophet or leader, then a man marrying his father's wives besides his own mother was kind of normalized in the community when I was quite young, so I didn't know it had been an issue in years before. I understand other leaders said, no way, that can't happen.
Okay.
So that was probably in the mid 90s that it started to happen. So by the time he did it, it was somewhat normalized among the people.
Those wives became your moms. So I seem to remember from the documentary that some of them were quite young. Were any of them younger than you when they became your moms?
Not the people that were married to his father, but it wasn't until we were in Texas that he started marrying girls that were younger than me.
Right. So if you're from the second wife, that would make sense. Do you know how many kids he has?
52.
Whoa, okay.
And that's from, I think it's from 17 wives. So he had 78, but he actually only had children from 17. And the first 5 or 6 had almost most of those children.
Oh, okay. How many kids did your mom have?
My mom had 8.
Okay.
And the first wife had 12, so that's 20 of us.
Oh my gosh. I can't imagine having 12 children. I can't imagine having 8 children. I have 1 child. I'm like, oh, I'm melting, dying. It's so much. Wow. Okay. So what was your childhood like when he took over? Do you remember, did he want to become prophet? Was it something he was vying for?
If he did, he didn't show it. And I felt like he was really stressed out when his father died. He was de facto in control, though, already. But it didn't seem to me like he wanted to take over, but he didn't feel like there was anybody else that could and be able to hold the people together.
Interesting.
And this is coming from a 12-year-old's viewpoint.
Sure.
I remember him sitting at the table probably 2 weeks later saying, well, in Joseph Smith's day, then, he was once just a presiding elder over the church, so we can have that.
So would you mind explaining for those who aren't familiar what people were saying about Rulon as far as him coming back or having some sort of immortality? I find that really interesting.
So my father taught very strongly that my grandfather's body would one day just be renewed. He'd come out and be a young person again, a young man. He'd be able to have children with all these wives he had married. And he would lead us on to Zion. He would be the last prophet before the judgments happened and this nation was destroyed. And he would survive those judgments and take whoever was prepared to be in Zion, in Jackson County, Missouri. So it was really confusing when his father died because all of us had been told growing up that he would be the last prophet. So how could somebody else come take his place and be the next prophet?
It's really interesting. And if I didn't make this clear in the beginning, this is the fundamentalist branch of Mormonism. So not the mainstream Mormonism that most people know, the missionaries who come and knock on your door. This is a sect that broke off when polygamy was outlawed and the church officially declared that they were going to stop practicing polygamy. And then this branch started. So I just wanted to make that clear because sometimes we get comments about that. But what I wanted to say was it's so interesting that he would come back as a young man, because I remember learning stuff like that, not coming back to live on this earth, but I remember being taught that when we die and go to heaven, we're renewed in our prime. And my question was always, well, what year is that? Is that going to be like 23? Or is it going to be like 31? And we would all debate about it. And so it's interesting that they're saying he would come back basically in his prime and continue to have kids after he's already been dead. So interesting.
Yeah, it started with Leroy Johnson, who was the prophet before Rulon, where Rulon said that about Leroy Johnson, and then Father said that about Rulon. And that almost plays into the same he'll be delivered scenario that we're in right now with the FLDS group. Okay.
Do you remember what was going on? I know you're 12, so it's kind of hard and you're in that mindset, but when he did die and he didn't come back, was everyone kind of panicked, really upset? Like, what was going on around then?
The feeling I felt was a lot of worry about what we're going to do now and how is Uncle Rulon still leading the people. I remember hoping he would somehow come back alive. For a little while after he died, I'm talking the same day, just a few hours, and then I come to realize that he was getting taken to the mortuary. So in my mind, he wasn't coming back, and I just didn't understand how this was going to work out if we were just going to continue as a group without a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was talked about in meeting kind of like that, like we would be told he's just in the next room, but he's still leading us. And the people weren't ready right at first to accept my father as the prophet. So it took a couple of months before it was actually announced. I don't remember the exact time frame.
That must have made you feel so special when you found out that your dad was the prophet. What's going through your mind as a 12-year-old you?
Yes, it was pretty amazing, and we thought it was pretty wonderful to have our father now be the prophet. And of course, that made everyone in the people look at our family as special. He had been the first counselor, so we already were looked that way, but this was tenfold once he's the prophet,
Mm-hmm.
which in turn puts on us a responsibility to represent him. And he always told us boys that you need to represent me right before the people because you affect my image.
Mm. How did that manifest with you? Was that really difficult? Did you have a hard time with that?
I was a teenager.
Yeah, so that must have been hard, right?
I don't know that I did very well. For sure when I was in Short Creek, I think I just kept being a teenager.
Uh-huh.
But he did make me a president of a deacon quorum at that time too, because he started the quorums of the priesthood, of the Aaronic priesthood after he became the prophet.
Yeah, can we talk about those changes really quick? Because it seems like if he wasn't planning on being the prophet, if he really didn't have this hunger for power, he really did step into those shoes once he became the prophet. As far as I know, it seemed like he made drastic changes. TVs are being thrown out, toys are being destroyed, everything is changing drastically, the colors that you can wear. What was that like, that process?
Yes, and the process started before he was the prophet. And I'm curious myself to know how much he influenced all the changes that really began in the mid-90s. But it just took on way more of a drastic shape after his father died.
Okay.
And I was young enough that I never saw a TV in our house. There were a couple at my grandfather's, and we rarely got to watch anything on them. The color red, I think, went out before I can remember.
Mm.
But once his father died, he started to get revelations, which his father hadn't ever claimed any special revelation like my father did. And I'm thinking it was almost a year before it was about 6 or 7 months after his father died that he started actually reading revelations to the people. And the feeling that came with that was, wow, this man's like the prophet Joseph Smith in the way he gives revelation. And he must be picking up where Joseph Smith left off and carrying this work forward. So it really became an excitement among a lot of the people, for sure was among the young people, that my father was beginning to carry on this work like Joseph Smith, giving revelation, giving direction to the people, starting to give projects. And then, of course, it didn't take very long before he cut all the meetings off in July of 2003, actually August of 2003.
And the meetings as far as like the Sunday meetings, the church meetings?
Church meetings and religious ordinances were stopped in August of 2003 because of his claim of wickedness among the people and living a social religion, idolatry because of a monument that had been made to Uncle Roy and the people of the 53 raid.
Oh, interesting.
And he really only kept marriage going after that stopped, at least in Short Creek. Unbeknownst to the people, he was already setting up those lands that he called lands of refuge. when he had these ordinances stopped among the people. So when he called people to the lands of refuge, he would tell them, the ordinances aren't stopped here, it's just in Short Creek.
Okay. Let's talk about when people started disappearing and going away and no one really knows where they're going, including your own family.
I would say mid to late 2003, I noticed the younger mothers, the younger ladies or girls that he had married weren't around anymore, and some of his most trusted wives. So automatically I started wondering where they were, where they were going. And he was always saying the government was coming after him and trying to stop the work of God, trying to stop plural marriage. And he took that opposition to plural marriage and, in the people's eyes, made underage marriage seem as sacred and important as plural marriage.
Interesting.
So these people disappeared, but we didn't have a clue, and he was gone all the time. If anybody started to even question him what he was doing, he would rebuke them and tell them it's none of their business to ever question what the Lord has him doing. So everyone learned real quick to not ask him questions about anything.
Which seems like the slow grooming process to eventually, when he's in prison, they're so conditioned to not ask or to look at any outside sources because it's evil and could send them to hell. And it just all ties in. As I'm reading your book, I'm seeing how, okay, this leads to this, because other people outside may be thinking, he went to prison, why didn't you just stop following him? But it's so much more complicated than that.
Much
And
more complicated.
Yeah, when you see how early on he starts dropping these little nuggets of you have to obey and don't question and don't look over there, don't look over here, it's so much easier to understand why someone would keep following him even after he's put in prison. In fact, it almost makes it easier to follow him when he's put in prison, because that's what happened to Joseph Smith, the original prophet. He was put in prison. And look at the church now, the mainstream Mormon church. So it's interesting. Okay, we'll get there. I'm skipping ahead. So people are being disappeared. You don't really know what's happening to them. And I'd like to talk about your mom, if you're comfortable, because I feel like this really illustrates how he doesn't really seem to care for certain people, even when they needed the most.
So my mom was quite an outspoken person. If she felt like something wasn't right, she wasn't afraid to speak up and speak her mind about a situation. Of course, he knew that. So he came to all the mothers that had children at a certain point in November 29, 2003, and told them the Lord was requiring him to take their younger children away to a different place that would be safe. And after he announced that to them, he then announced that none of them could come with their children, and they were being required by God to hand their children to him and let him take them somewhere where they didn't have any idea. He just told them it was Zion. These children would be taken to a place they'd be protected, and if he didn't take them, these children would be destroyed. Wow. My mother found out she had cancer early in 2003. She had questions a year or two before that, but Father wouldn't allow her to go get checked up to see what was wrong. But when she did find out, it was breast cancer in the late stages. So the doctors didn't feel like she was going to survive when they found out. And they immediately had her go through chemotherapy in early 2003, which she lost all her hair and was really sick. But it didn't kill the cancer. And she wanted to find an alternative cure, a natural cure with herbs and other things, and became very involved in looking into that. She also kept my father really informed about the cures she was finding and how she felt like chemo wasn't a good thing. So just before he told her he had to take her children, he came back to her and said, "You're about to lose your faith and your salvation because you're looking for this other cure when I told you to get chemotherapy, and the Lord requires you to get chemotherapy again, even though the doctors had told her she only had 6 months to live.
Oh, wow.
Whether she got it or not. So he required this of her, and she didn't want it, but he told her it was the will of the Lord. So she did it again, and was just beginning it at the same time her children were all taken from her. So when he told her he was taking her children, she told him that she might die, and he couldn't do this to her. And he put the option in front of her: either keep your children and they'll be destroyed by the government, or let me take them to a safe place where they'll be preserved. And you pray and repent and qualify to be named to come there, hopefully.
Oh my gosh, that's so awful. Just the emotional, spiritual manipulation there is astounding. And she's at the end of her life just wanting to be with her kids, and she's separated from them. Eventually, he does end up taking her there, right, to see them one last time?
So she had them taken from him, and then he also took me and my younger sister and had us move to a different house in Short Creek without her knowing for a little while. So at one point, the only children she had any association with that were her own were her 2 married daughters. She had no idea or association with the other 5 of us. And it really devastated her and made her very sick. In June, so about 6 months later, he called her down to Texas and said she was named to be there. And at this point, she had pneumonia building up in her lungs. She was on oxygen and was very weak when she went down to Texas. She only lived for just over a month after that.
Mm. And you were able to say goodbye to her?
Yes, just before she passed away, he had myself and my older sister Rachel come down to see her. He told us we didn't get to go to Zion, but we could come to the hospital where Mother was getting her lungs suctioned out and visit her before she died. So we came down to San Angelo, Texas, and visited her in the hospital. She wanted to get out of the hospital and go back to Texas, to the land of refuge, and die there where her younger children were, instead of in the hospital. So they released her from there to do that. And Father sent me and Rachel back to Short Creek. While we were traveling back, then he called and said the Lord had named us to move there, and that he and my mother had suffered for us so we could come there.
Oh, wow. I remember in your book you mentioned you had driven 9 hours back toward home, and then they're like, never mind, you can come back, and then you turn around. Ugh.
Yes.
How frustrating.
And we had to listen to a really long training. It was the initiatory training you had to listen to before you could actually go to those lands.
What did that sound like? What is he training you for?
First, he went through the Doctrine and Covenants and read all the verses in there about Zion's redemption that Joseph Smith had given. And then he read a whole bunch of his own revelations where he claimed God was directing him to establish these lands, build a community where the people could eventually move to that were faithful enough to partake in the redemption of Zion. So not everybody would be allowed to, but the faithful would. And also announced to us that everyone from Short Creek would end up being driven, like the saints were from Missouri, with murdering and killing and all manner of violence.
Whoa.
And claimed that was one of the main reasons he was actually setting these places of refuge up, which is why he called them places of refuge.
Yeah. Wow. So he's really taking Joseph Smith's words to the T, and I don't know if twisting them is even the right way of saying it. It seems like he's just following them. He's just doing what Joseph Smith is talking about, because for those who aren't familiar, Joseph Smith said the end of times is coming. It will happen in my lifetime. Didn't he say in his lifetime?
In this generation, I think, is
in
what
this generation.
Something to that effect.
Right, which didn't happen. So this is continuously from prophet to prophet. It's like, okay, now this generation. So people are really scared of this actually happening. And it seems like Warren is really drilling that home into everyone's minds. Get ready. What was that like? You must have just been living in fear constantly.
Yeah, all my growing up life, he told us the judgments were just about to happen. We thought they were going to happen by the year 2000, and it didn't happen. But once the year 2000 was crossed, the training on the judgments was always really strong about how they're just about to come. They could be here any day. You have to be ready to be lifted up. And these lands of refuge were a step forward in that training. So living there, you constantly thought the judgments are just about to happen.
Yeah.
And we have to live righteous enough on these places for God to preserve them. And anybody that's not here will most likely be destroyed, was the common consensus among the people, because he was going to bring the most faithful. So he made it sound like first, Utah and Arizona would drive the people out of Short Creek with mobbings and killings, scatter them everywhere, and he himself would go find the people that were faithful and bring them to those places where we would have to feed and clothe them and house them. And then the judgments of God would come after that.
So I just want everyone to remember this when we get to the end of the story, the end of Ammon's story, because there's so much moving around and shuffling people. It's hard to keep track of. Honestly, in your book, I was like, again. So much. Okay, we're going to get there. So you get to the ranch and you are put to work immediately. You're still young, teenager, and let's talk about all the manual labor you were forced to do.
When I got there, I had to listen to all the trainings he had ever given on the places of refuge before I could start working. And that was I got it done in 2 days, 2 full days of listening to his trainings. And then he put me right on the work crew. He had a really tight deadline on a large house that was being built for him. So I started on that with all the other men, and we worked till 2 a.m. We got up at 5, had a prayer with all the workers at 6, and went right to work.
Oh my gosh. And you say large house. This is like 25,000 square feet. Did I remember that?
Yes.
Right? The first
yes,
one.
I estimate it at least 25,000 square feet.
Wow.
Like a hotel, more.
What was the house actually like? Were there just tons of bedrooms? Did he have special rooms for special things? Why did he need so much space?
Well, he had his own special room and office and waiting room, but the rest of the house was bedrooms and a very large kitchen, a large dining room, large sewing rooms. But it was mostly living quarters because he had a large family by this time. And at first he moved about 5 families into that house with his, because housing was really tight when we first were there.
Wow. So his plan was to move all of his 70 plus wives and children into this one house.
Yes. And after we got that house done, we built at least 6 more houses. So the families that originally moved into that house with us were moved into other homes, and his family eventually filled that house all the way up. And we actually got to where there was only a few of his family left in Short Creek because everybody had been named, he claimed, to be there.
That's so interesting. I'm just trying to imagine what it would be like as a wife in a home that big with that many people in one kitchen.
I think that kitchen's bigger than a lot of restaurant kitchens.
Oh my gosh, it would have to be.
Yes, it was huge, and the house is actually pretty crowded once most of our family was living there.
So what was it like being his son? Did he treat you differently than other people as far as, I mean, I guess I want to know, first of all, the ratio of how many people at the ranch were his kids versus not his kids, because he had so many kids, but I'm wondering if there was preferential treatment to his children.
Well, he had most of his children there. I kind of go off the raid statistics because I don't know how many people were there in the earlier years. And there were definitely more families there later, but there were 416 children when the raid happened, and he had at least 45 of us there. So that's about 10%.
Okay. So did you notice him treating you differently than other people, or?
He required more of us, and his family was the first people he would try anything new out with in teaching or requirements or anything. We were his first set of guinea pigs. He required a lot of us in standing up to the mark of his requirements upon everybody. And me and my older brother Levi were actually put out on the workforce and hardly had anything to do with our own family there on the ranch for several years. We didn't eat with them or go to their prayer times. We just lived in the house, and that was about it.
Mm.
Which was only a few hours of the night.
Yeah. And when you say a few, in some of these weeks and months, it was literally 2 hours of sleep that you were allotted.
Correct.
2 hours of sleep and then doing manual labor. What struck me the most in your book, not the most, one of the things that struck me the most was that you were given these really harsh deadlines to finish things, these homes or the temple or whatever it was. And then if you didn't finish it, somehow you were in sin. And then there were religious consequences and religious punishments. And I'm thinking, you're building a house. Things are going to come up. It's going to be difficult. You can't, like, why are they being punished religiously? Can you talk about what that was like for you?
Mm-hmm. When he gave us the tight deadlines, he told us we had to seek for the strength of heaven. That's his term. The Lord give us strength to be able to stay up much longer than what a human can endure, and pray for materials to show up if we miss something. But we worked intense time schedules, and if we missed it, almost every time he would tell us the blessing you were offered if you would have met that deadline was to come into God's presence. He never really told us that before the deadline. If we did meet a deadline, he would give a special training, or at times let all the men with families in Short Creek go back and visit them for a day. Whenever we missed him, he would gather us for a meeting, or would call if he wasn't there, and rebuke us sharply, tell us we were not being fervent enough. There were people in sin that would have to be sent away. People would lose their families among the men that hadn't been fervent enough, and claimed he was atoning for us in a manner like Jesus did on the cross. He would often tell us the Lord had a great storm headed our way that was going to wipe us out because God was so angry with us, but that he himself had prayed to the Lord to have mercy on us, and the Lord had required him to atone so that he wouldn't destroy us.
That's terrifying. You mentioned one specific incident in your book where he was physically showing these sort of symptoms of atoning. Can you talk about that?
Yes, he did a quote atonement in front of the whole people at one meeting in 2004. And I know from my siblings he did it a few times in his own house also, but I wasn't there. At the meeting that I was at, he gave a really long talk about how we had been lacking in our faith and fervency, that we'd become complacent, and he had had to atone for us or we would have been destroyed. And then at the end of the meeting, he said the prayer, and it was a really long prayer. Towards the end, he started groaning and moaning and acting like he could barely speak the words, and was hunched clear over the pulpit. By the time he said amen, he collapsed onto the floor and appeared unconscious to us. I was 14, so I was terrified about what was happening, and I thought he was dying. Yeah. And this was what he was telling us his atonements were.
Wow. I have to wonder, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think he was putting on a show? Do you think he really believes it? I mean, you've known him forever, so what are your opinions on that?
Well, it's really hard, and it's like an enigma why he did it. He didn't do things like that before his father died that I can remember. He was a really good actor, really good at drama. And that's what I think it was now, drama. And I don't know if he had something mental going on that made him do these kind of strange things, because it kind of appears like that to me now. If any of his writings that I've read, that his journals that he was keeping during that time, sounds like he was seeing drastic visions and everything clear back then, which easily could just be a psychotic break or something.
Yeah. But when you are raised in this type of religion that believes in things like this, I mean, we look at Joseph Smith in the first vision, where he drops to his knees, and then there's the pillar of light, and then God and Jesus descend, and he speaks to them and restoring the gospel. True living prophet upon the earth, restored once again. It's not that far of a jump to see something like you saw your father do and think, oh, yeah, he's the prophet. This makes sense.
Correct. If he really is the prophet like we believed Joseph Smith was, or prophets in the Bible, for him to claim he was seeing a vision was perfectly in line with his claim of being a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easy to believe at the time that he really was seeing visions, that God was showing him we were about to be destroyed, and easy enough for him to claim that he was atoning for the people. And he would reference Moses in the Bible, where it says Moses and Aaron made an atonement for the people. Most of the people in the FLDS weren't familiar with what Moses and Aaron actually were doing when that statement was made in the Bible. So he made it appear like a great, terrible suffering.
Wow. So that's so interesting. So, how old were you when he was finally caught by law enforcement?
I was 16 years old
Okay.
when FBI caught up with him.
Right. He was on the FBI's most wanted list.
Yes.
And this was because, was it Elisa Wall that spoke out?
Yes.
I'm trying to remember all the details.
And he didn't particularly let us know why they were after him. He just told us there was a warrant for his arrest in Utah and Arizona, and said God had told him to not allow himself to be taken. So it was very important for him to be very secretive in what he did, even who he allowed to know where he was traveling, and he took extreme measures to keep himself secret.
Okay. And tell me if I'm getting these details right, because I feel like we should mention it. Elisa Wall went to the police because she was forced to marry someone when she was underage, and it was directed by Warren. Is that why they were after him?
Yes, he was very much the one running events when she was married to Alan Steed. I don't know what year it was, but that's the beginning of his takedown. And I remember when she did get married to him, to Alan Steed, because Uncle Fred's family sat by our family at the general meetings there in Short Creek.
Okay. So let's talk about the raid then. You were there for a couple years doing manual labor, and then you see hundreds of police outside the gates ready to come in. We're talking, we got the SWAT teams with the guns, and this isn't just a few cop cars. So what's happening around the ranch? What are people doing, thinking? Just give us an idea of what's going on.
I was really surprised when I found out law enforcement was at the gate, because my father was already in prison, and I really didn't know what they would be looking for. When I climbed up on the grain elevator and saw there were hundreds of them, I was really shocked. And I just had no clue why they were there, who would have tipped them off to something happening there, because I knew the people there were the most loyal and supportive of Warren.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a shock to me, and I had no idea that it was actually going to turn into a massive raid at the time.
Yeah. Can you explain to everyone why they were there?
We found out that someone had called CPS, Texas CPS, claiming they were a 16-year-old girl named Sarah Jessup Barlow, married to Dale Barlow, and were being abused and beaten. That was taken to a judge in San Angelo, who signed a warrant for them to come in and get this Sarah Jessup Barlow and remove her from the ranch. that was the origin of the raid. And I have no idea how long it was in the works before they actually showed up, but they came in force. They set out to the gate because the man in charge of the land wouldn't allow them on until they produced a warrant. Once they did and told them who they were looking for, they tried to convince the sheriff and the police that we had no one there named Sarah Jessup Barlow or Dale Barlow, but they weren't going to accept it at face value, so they asked to come in and have a place where they could interview the young girls that were on the ranch. So they came in about 9 p.m. to the meeting house, which is also the school, and started to interview the girls. Most of the police officers stayed outside surrounding the property. They brought in a couple of SWAT teams, and they just kept a drone monitoring everything that was going on at that time. They kept the girls up all through the night. They found journals in their classroom that told of underage marriages, children being born to girls that were underage. And the next morning, they started to expand their searches and their demands. And they brought a lot more police officers in the next morning so they could start to search the whole place.
Right. And for the record, there actually was no person named Sarah there.
Correct.
So what is your suspicion of who called?
They confirmed a few weeks after they came on that it was a person in Colorado named Rosita Swinton who had a history of doing fake calls for abuse like that.
Oh.
And the thing that bothered us was we felt like they could have figured that out right up front.
Right.
And maybe the position we've taken is we're grateful for what evidence they found that needed to be taken care of in the courts, but there's got to be a better way to do it.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, I mean, that's like the bulk of your book is talking about the day-to-day experience of these kids who were taken, yourself included,
Yes.
separated from their mothers, put in these random places, just on cots on the floor, not the best living situation. And it was in an effort to protect the kids, which that's why I think it's interesting, your book, because it gives such a different, unique perspective that maybe other people wouldn't have really considered, because from the outside, people are probably thinking, yeah, go get the kids. We need to save the kids. But we're not actually thinking about what that means, actually what that means to the kids who are being separated from their families, who maybe aren't being abused. I mean, spiritual manipulation, yes. Emotional manipulation, yes. But as far as like physical abuse, I don't know if we should even quantify it. It's all there. But we have to take into account their mentality of being separated from their mothers and being ripped away from their homes. And it was handled so poorly. And I think you would agree that it made things so much worse in a sense. Now, I don't know, like you just said, the ends maybe justify the means as far as they did find damning evidence that put Warren away for life, but it just should have been handled so much differently. So let's talk about your perspective when they just started bussing everybody out of there.
To all of us, with our mentality, we thought it was religious persecution.
Yeah.
They were here to destroy our religion and only confirmed our faith in Warren, because he told us the world wants to come against you. They want to destroy you. They want to take you away and indoctrinate you in their ways. And then they came. They took us away.
Yeah.
And we thought that's what it was. So if it looked to people out there that we were being saved, none of us thought we were being saved when it happened. And the trauma of the separation from parents was really hard to deal with for a lot of the children. There was some children that had been separated from their mothers before they came there. I will say it wasn't really widespread, but there was at least 10 mothers that I know of, and it could be more, out of the 138 that were actually had children there on the ranch. 10 or 15 that had been separated from their children because they weren't considered worthy enough. and their children were under the direction of their fathers and his other wives in different families if they had been separated. So there was that fact that it happened to some people, and it had happened to my siblings, obviously, when they were separated from their mothers, although at this point most of them were with their mothers. But it's a different thing when you have people you think want you dead and are persecuting you that come and take you away from your parents and put you in a place that is so foreign to anything you've ever seen in your life. And that's what made it so traumatic to everyone, and the coarseness with which it was handled and the force. Where even when children did get taken from their mothers or separated in the previous years, their mothers had been required to hand them over and put on a willing face that this is what I want for my child because it's Zion that you're going to, versus law enforcement pulling you away, kicking and screaming from your parents.
Yeah.
And taking you out to what you thought was a very wicked place.
Yeah.
So you can see the mental trauma that would cause a child.
That's terrifying. And also, for those who don't know, in Short Creek, it was very isolated. You're not really experiencing the outside world. You are in your own isolated community. And so, like you're saying, when you're being ripped out of the only place that you know and the only people you know with the only type of clothes that you know, I mean, we'll put pictures on the screen of what the clothes look like. This is a very different community. It's not just people who choose to go and live off the grid. Everything is very tightly controlled. What you wear, what you eat, who you marry, everything is very insulated. And so I just want to add that context so when people understand you guys being taken away from that and just dropped into this whole other world, this world who you've been told is full of sin and evil. And one thing that you mentioned in your book is how you knew that they were about to breach your temple, and you were told that if anyone who was unworthy or anyone who was worldly went into your temple, you would all be damned to hell, right? So there's other stakes here as far as what's going on when you're taken away.
Correct. The temple was built by people that Warren strictly named could help build it, and then he had us only have even another group that was strictly named to work on the inside. Once it was complete, no one got to go in if he didn't particularly name them to, or even go on the lot.
Wow.
And told us, starting at the time the temple began to be built, that if anyone went there unappointed, all of us would be rejected by God. So when the police are coming to breach, then everyone on the land and all the children in the different shelters are terrified that God's going to reject us if the police get on the temple lot or into the temple.
Yeah.
At one time he told us we should be willing to fight to protect the temple, and if we were faithful, God would strike down anybody that tried coming on there with lightning and stop them from getting there. So we had that, but at this point, I don't recall if he had told us to not do anything violent or what it was, but no one ever in the raid attempted to be violent when they were breaching the temple, which is a really good thing.
And knowing what we know now about what was going on in that temple, do you think it was specifically just to keep people out so they wouldn't find out he was abusing children there?
Well, it's highly likely that he wanted people to reach mentally, spiritually, hard enough to God to allow them to go in the temple, that when he brought them in there, they would be ready to accept anything he was going to teach them in there.
Yeah. And that is where they did find video recordings and audio recordings of this abuse that happened, right?
Yes, there was a vault in the temple that had a lot of records. A vault in a building nearby the temple, which we called the print building, that had it. And then in my father's house, in his area, they also would have found evidence of what he was doing. So there was probably 3 places especially that they found that stuff.
Oh my gosh. So awful. Let's talk more about your perspective you were taken to a pavilion first with all of the kids, and then after a couple weeks, you were transferred 7 hours away to a boys' ranch, which when you described it, I was thinking this is a troubled teen school, the way it's set up. And there's no doors on bedrooms, no privacy, and you guys are just, it's completely out of your element because of the standards that you lived by as far as privacy and covering and modesty, even down to the pajamas. When you said in there, they brought us pajamas, and you're looking at them going, those are shorts. We can't wear those because you're not even allowed to cover your skin when you sleep or uncover your skin when you sleep.
Right. So I went to a place called the Civic Center in El Dorado first. Then they bused us to Fort Concho in San Angelo. And when they moved most of the family and children to the pavilion and the Coliseum, they bused all the boys that were 12 and older to Boys Ranch up northwest of Amarillo. 27 of us at first. And we were really shocked because we had been told they were going to take us all to one location and reunite families with each other. A lot of families had been split up, especially because they had taken the older girls first when they removed the children from the ranch, and then they had taken the older boys last. I went with my family, but most of the older boys actually didn't get taken until after the rest of the children had been taken from the ranch. So we wanted to be with our families, and were told we would be, and then they send us up to Boys Ranch instead. So we were really angry about that and really worried about what was going to happen to the rest of our siblings.
What was it like being appointed by everyone to be in charge because you were the oldest boy and you had the Aaronic priesthood?
I was the oldest boy under 18 that was taken in the raid, and we had this idea already. If you were the oldest, you took charge of prayer times, things like that. So it was natural to appoint me, for them all to choose me. And it was a huge responsibility for me to take. Something I definitely never had expected in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And that only grew in intensity once they brought all the other boys up there. Because with the older boys there, it wasn't so much to worry about. There were a few younger boys, but they were 12 years old and older, so they could take care of themselves pretty well. Once they brought the other children up, we had 5 years old on up, and a huge responsibility of taking care of all these children.
Yeah. And let's talk about some of the conditions that they had you living in, because we would hope that things were handled differently and everyone felt safe and comfortable, but that wasn't really the case. And I guess I just want to hear from your perspective why you think they were keeping you so tightly controlled, especially down to taking your cell phones.
I think the reason they took the cell phones, well, I don't even know why they took them the first time, but the second time they took the cell phones, then some of the mothers in Fort Concho had called and talked to the news media and told them the conditions that they were living in the forts, with the really crowded conditions, the constant watch by CPS. And Judge Walther signed a warrant for them to take all communication devices away that would interfere with the investigation. So nobody was supposed to have a cell phone at that point. Any calls with our parents or anyone were to be strictly monitored by CPS once we were moved up to Boys Ranch. And a couple of us, well, I got my cell phone through and got a bunch more cell phones there, but that wasn't known at the time.
Yeah. It's just so interesting as you go through the day-to-day and how you were just so tightly controlled. It's almost like you were back at the ranch, but in flipped conditions where you don't want to be there, but it's the same amount of control. I mean, you're not doing manual labor. Wait, they offered to pay you to do manual labor, right, at the boys' ranch?
Yes, they offered to send us around and do manual labor, but we were so afraid of being separated again and shipped to other places that we were just not even about to do anything that would break us up as a group.
Mm-hmm. One scene that stuck out to me too is when they got you birthday cake. Can you explain? Can you explain that moment?
Yes. I think it was thoughtful of the people at Boys Ranch to get me the birthday cake. Father had told us a few years previously to not eat sugar food. And when they brought the cake, it was everything against what he had taught us we could eat and couldn't eat. So we thought it would be sinful for us to eat those cakes.
Oh.
So a couple of the boys just tasted it, and then we threw them away. I mean, it seems really
Oh.
ungrateful now, but that's what we did, and we thought it was the right thing to do. We thought it was being true to our faith to do something like that.
Yeah, standing up for what you believe in. I think it's admirable, especially that you declined having television. I would feel, I would think that some of you would be like, wait, let's say yes to the TVs and see what we've been missing. But everyone was like, no, no TVs, get those out of here.
Correct. And the reason for that is to be on that place in Texas, you were required to live a really high life and be very obedient to Warren's requirements. And we knew that didn't change even if we were taken away from the land. So
Okay.
if we were to be like, yeah, let's watch TV, let's read novels, whatever, and he were to get wind of that, he most likely wouldn't let us be back there if we got to go back and live with our families. So we'd be separated from them anyway.
So it was a fear thing.
It was very much a fair thing.
Got it. Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we get into when you were taken back to the ranch?
We could move on. I'll say we really did have an exciting time when we would sneak off of Boys Ranch.
In what way?
We would sneak out during the night and jump in a vehicle with our parents or our friends and just have a little bit of free time with them without anybody monitoring us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that story's also told in the book.
I feel like I missed that one. I missed that one, Ammon. I don't know how.
Go to the
Maybe.
chapter that says take away the tea.
Oh, right. I think I read that one when I was half asleep breastfeeding. I did read it. That's so funny. Well, that's good that you did have those moments of enjoyment because you were taken for 2 months before you went back.
Yes, we were.
Okay. Now, I feel like everyone's probably thinking, no, they took all of the kids, they just let them go back to the ranch. I know that their parents, their biological parents, had to go and pick them up from the interview we did with Sam and Melissa. But it seems like, wait, you're just going to put them back into the place that they were trying to rescue them from. So what's going on? It seems like just so much chaos when this happens.
Right. Once the courts ruled that we should go back, they had our biological parents pick us up. CPS didn't drop the suits right away, and a lot of us didn't immediately move back to the ranch. Anybody that did was actually monitored by CPS until they were non-suited to make sure the children weren't being abused or anything like that. But it happened pretty fast, and before a year was up, everyone was non-suited by CPS. And for a year and a half, probably, we actually had a lot more freedom on that ranch and in the houses we lived in. And we did go to things like amusement parks and events. And even on the ranch, we just didn't have that constant religious requirements put in front of us every day or deadlines. And a lot of the men worked off the ranch to earn money to pay attorney bills, to pay for the food and clothing, because the raid was very, very expensive for us. So we thought God had delivered us. That's what we believed. And my father sent a message. This is as great a deliverance as when Moses brought the children through the Red Sea on dry ground in the Bible.
Whoa. Okay. So I guess I'm wondering why there wasn't those strict rules and the deadlines that you mentioned for that year and a half. Was Warren just taking a break? It doesn't seem like in his character to just allow things to be chill for a minute.
He was in Kingman Jail in Arizona, and he had a lot less contact available to him when he was there.
Okay.
His phone use was very restricted, and it seemed like he just let off for a little while. With all the government people coming there, monitoring everything, it would have been pretty hard for him to do anyway. And it wasn't until he moved from Kingman that he started upping the requirements again.
let's talk about these requirements. They get pretty extreme, and we can talk about how you were sent away and then brought back and then sent away and then brought back. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I mean, the chapter is called Whiplash. I'm like, yeah, this is about right.
Okay, once I moved back to the ranch, I first got involved in teaching school. I was told to do that by the bishop, who was Merrill Jessup, and also my father. And when father moved to the Salt Lake prison, or the Utah penitentiary, and was given his communication again, he started sending a lot of direction and revelation again, more than he ever had before. Naming who could be there, who should be sent away, what projects we should start on, the requirements of who could help on the projects, and started bishop interviews or interviews with the First Presidency members to see if we were worthy to be there and to assist on the projects. He made me principal of the school the second year I taught, and I was really involved with that and not as much on the projects. I was supposed to go work on the projects once school was out. And he started sending hundreds of people away that were living on that Texas ranch, claiming they weren't worthy to be there and they needed to repent before they could be allowed back. The school went from 300 students down to 100 students. The teachers were constantly being shuffled to try to keep up with the changes in the classrooms and teachers being sent away. And then just before his trial started in Texas, he sent me away to a different land to help. And then he brought me back just as his trial was finished and he was convicted. And that was a really big deal because the Utah Supreme Court had overturned his conviction in Utah. Arizona had dismissed their case, and there was no conviction at the time Texas convicted him. So he had groups of men and women saying prayer constantly for him when that trial happened, praying that God would deliver him, cause the jury to say he was not guilty, and so forth. Once he was convicted and was moved to the penitentiary, the prison system in Texas, then even his language started to change in how he talked, and he sent more people away. His family started moving a lot by 2012, and we would be sent to Short Creek and be told we were not a member and had to repent of our sins. Then he would send a revelation that we could be rebaptized and made a member again, and a few weeks later he could send another message that now you're a non-member and needed to repent. And I know a lot of instances where siblings would be told they're a non-member, and the people that told them they were a non-member also had a revelation in their hands saying they should be rebaptized in 2 weeks and be part of the church again. So it was very confusing to everyone.
Yeah.
And that brought us to living with our focus just what's going to happen next week after his visit, because that seemed to be when most of the changes would happen, would be after his Saturday visits.
Mm-hmm. And another way to maintain control is he said, okay, no more internet. Don't look up anything about the trial.
Correct. And he did keep quite tight control on the internet before the raid. He said it could not be on the land. After the raid, it was brought there because everybody needed it for their court cases involving the children and so forth. Once he learned it was there, he ordered them to take it off the land or else we would all be rejected. So they took it off the land, and when he realized the evidence they had found against him, he said no one should look at anything online pertaining to anything that the Texas Rangers or the state of Texas had taken from the ranch, and eventually send a message to the whole people that they could not be part of the church if they were to even use the internet at all. Early 2011.
Jeez. He said something about if you were to look at the things they found in the temple, it would be like you receiving a revelation that you shouldn't be. Or what was the verbiage he used?
He said if you were to look at anything they had taken from his sacred records, is what he called it. You would be running ahead of God to learn truth about him, and it would be like learning truth from the devil, and he would twist it in your mind, and it could make you apostatize.
Jeez.
Which, of course, left us all with this wonderment, like, what is in there that would make me apostatize if I were to see it?
Wow,
But at the same time, you're told, do not doubt, do not let the least doubt into your mind, or it'll be like the devil gets his foot in the door and won't let you shut it, and doubts will just stream in and you'll apostatize and lose your salvation.
I just want that to sink in for everybody. The manipulation is so intense because he knows that if anyone were to see that evidence that we mentioned earlier with these children, of course, you're going to say that can't be right. That can't be what God wants. And you are going to go down that path of leaving the church. And so he gets a step ahead of it by telling you what's going to happen, so that if it does, you go, oh, he prophesied this, and now I can't leave. It's so smart, but it's also just so typical cult leader. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it happened pretty fast. People that had seen the evidence firsthand, they left.
Yeah.
Really quickly in 2011. And we were told, sure enough, that's proof to you what's going to happen. And these people, he would name their son of perdition, or they could never be allowed back into the church because they touched those things.
Oh my gosh.
The thing that keeps people from looking and keeps people in is they believe they'll lose their eternal salvation.
Yeah.
If they do anything in that order that would be against what he says, and especially to find out if he did something wrong.
So this time frame, you were 20 when you were a principal, and then you were back and forth, a member and then not a member, not a member, rebaptized, sent here, sent there. And we're talking across states, not just house to house or city to city. I mean, at one point, Ammon, you purchased a tent and you're living in the woods so that you can get a job somewhere. And then you get the job and he goes, just kidding, you need to come back for Sunday school or for Sunday meeting and you have to go back to Utah. I was just like, what is going on? You're just all over the place, and a million gold stars for figuring it out. I mean, you were doing things. You were getting the jobs. You were figuring out a way to make money and provide for yourself, just despite the circumstances that you were in. I just cannot imagine the mental gymnastics that you're having to do to make this make sense in your head, and just to stay steadfast and try and stay strong in your beliefs while you were just forced all over the place. How are you doing during this 10-year period?
So, of course, he always taught that the priesthood will try you to see if you'll stay faithful. And at the same time, he kept wanting me to confess to molesting my younger sisters, which I didn't even really know what he meant when he started accusing me of it. And so I didn't know what to say back to him, but I wouldn't ever admit to the things he wanted me to admit to because I hadn't done them, and I didn't even know what he was trying to get me to admit to at first. By the time he sent me completely away from the people, he said he had called upon me to confess again to molesting my younger sisters, and I wrote to him, I have confessed to you everything I've ever done. And I had nothing to confess to him about that. So he sent back, you're an apostate and have to go away, far away. You can't live in a state with any of the people of the FLDS church, but you need to still send money so that you can be allowed back to be a part of the church. And I did it. I went and got a job and started earning money and sent back anything extra. He didn't want me to keep any extra money. And it was supposed to prove to him that he could allow me back to be a part of the church. And I'd grown up learning that the priesthood will try you to see if you'll stay faithful. And if you were to break, you would lose your salvation eternally. So that's your mental gymnastics. And he called me back started meetings again. He had stopped meetings for about a year. And that's when he started saying things really crazy.
Yeah. Can we talk about some of those things?
When he first called me back, he sent me away within 2 weeks, and I had to get another job. Then he called me back 3 weeks later. So I had to quit my job and keep going to these meetings. He said, if you don't attend the meetings, then you're showing God that you don't care and you don't want to be part of his church. But then he started telling us that the judgments were starting and people were being lifted off this earth that were evil and taken to some other planet. He said there was only 10% of the world population left at one point. And then he stopped the meetings really abruptly. So we didn't know exactly what was going on. And a lot of us had jobs by this time with companies that were part of the FLDS and just started working. After a little while, he called back a few people to go to meetings again. And this is still in Short Creek. And they went until almost the end of that year, 2017. But anybody that went to those meetings treated almost everybody else like there was something terribly wrong with them and avoided us and shunned us, and we didn't know why. So I, along with other brothers, just worked on different jobs and didn't really know what he was saying for almost 5 years. I'll say 4 years, 2021. And it was actually really nice to not be hearing anything from him for those years, for the whole people, because it seemed like everyone started to relax, started to take life easier and not feel that constant threat. There was no men that were considered authorities in Short Creek or anywhere in Utah where the people of the FLDS had moved, because most of them had left Short Creek by that time. In 2021, July, 7 of my sisters left the church. 2 of them were scribes who were typing all the revelations my father was giving at the time they left. And until COVID had started, they had been personally visiting him down in Texas every weekend, often for 4 hours at a time. Yet it was kept really secret what he was saying, because everything he does is kept secret. So these 7 sisters left. 2 of them were my full siblings. And I was stunned. I would never have expected the people that were the closest to my father to leave the church.
Yeah.
So I started asking questions of other siblings that stayed. Why did this happen? And some of them started to tell me the things they were hearing, which were just astonishingly ridiculous. And they were ranging from accusing almost everyone in the church membership of being on drugs and killing people, or engaging in prostitutism and anything evil he could think of, really, to saying that cities had been wiped off the United States, off the map, states had been destroyed, different pieces of earth had come back, like asteroid type, that the 10 tribes had landed somewhere in the north and were building a bridge across to the American continent. Just the craziest things you can even imagine.
This is what Warren is saying.
This is what Warren was saying in his revelations.
Okay.
And even people that were listening to them admitted to me that it didn't make any sense, and it was trying their testimony of him to hear the things that he was saying. So it started to make sense to me why these sisters left. And I felt like at this point I could disregard everything he was saying. But there was still that control I grew up with that made me feel like, well, you don't want to leave because you're still in the true church, but somehow God's allowing this man to maybe have a psychotic breakdown or something and say these crazy things to see if everybody will leave. So it's that same, this is another test. And that's what anyone involved that stayed in, that was listening to him, would say. This is just a test to see if he'll stay faithful.
I have no words. I have no words. Okay, so let's talk about the moment then when you realized who he really was and what he was up to when you talked to your sisters.
All right. So I had these sisters that left. They got married, started having a life. Yet my father claimed they were righteous and they were in the celestial kingdom, which was very confusing to everyone. But it also justified family members visiting them. So, as you know, in the FLDS, it's considered very sinful to talk to anyone that leaves the church. And at one point, we were told if we did that, we would be sent away and not be allowed back in the church. But now he's saying these people that had left were very righteous, and that even includes my sister Rachel, that she's in the celestial kingdom. He'll say some person that he claims is in heaven that she's married to, all of them. Anyway, family members started to visit these sisters that had left. And other family members felt like it was wrong and would write to him. And when he found out, he would eventually say, well, they were lifted up and taken there to do that, to go visit them. And it was a test or whatever he claimed, whatever he reasoned. Anyway, this comes down to 2023. I had a younger sister that hadn't left that went to visit these sisters. And I had an older sister that seemed very concerned that these sisters that were out of the church would tell my younger sister things that would make her leave.
Mm-hmm.
And she sent this younger sister, I believe I talk about her in my book, her name is Millie. She sent her a text message and copied it over to me. And in there she stated that there are things you will hear from these sisters that will make you lose your testimony. And if his own wives heard them, they would lose their testimony and leave. So I called this sister up and said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Things that'll make us leave? Is this just things out of his records that you were told about? And she said, no. And I have to backtrack a little here. Rachel had got my number in 2019 and texted me this message, and the very first words said, we were sexually abused by father. She did that because she knew I wouldn't read the message because of how much he had warned us against listening to her or anything she would say. And he had told us she would just lie and make things up. So I got that text message and saw that, and I had asked other sisters that were around her age if father really was like that. And they said he wasn't. So now in 2023, when this older sister's telling me if I find out something he did, I would possibly leave, I said, did he really sexually abuse some of his girls? And she said, yes. And I said, did he do it to you? And she said, yes. And that's what just blew me out of the water. And I really asked her for a little while, explain to me what you dare or feel comfortable with. And she finally admitted that he had touched her very inappropriately and made her touch him very inappropriately. Mm-hmm. And I felt like the bottom of my world dropped out. And the first thing that came back to my mind was all those times he had tried to get me to confess to things I hadn't done. And it was these very same things. It was because he did them.
Yeah.
So I was really confused at first and felt like I should just go read my Bible to find out what Jesus had to say about this kind of stuff. So that's what I did, and came to this realization that he had no way that he could be our prophet and stand in that position based off of his own requirements and rules that he required us to live by in the church.
Yeah. And something I want to point out as well is that, from what I understand, he was claiming to everyone that marrying these young girls and doing the things that he was doing was of God. So when people found out about it, they in some way wanted to either defend it or go along with it or agree with it because they thought that's what God wanted. Is that right?
Yes, he obviously manipulated the young girls that he married into believing that he did it to protect their lives.
Yeah.
Often when he'd marry these young girls, he would claim God had shown him if they didn't marry him, they would be destroyed. And then the inappropriate things he was doing with them and other women there on the ranch that were married to him was kept very secret, so we didn't really know about it. And I didn't know the depth of it until I learned this about my sister and what happened to her and other siblings. Then I learned also what he had done in secret with these underage girls that he had married.
Yeah.
And it is a common thing among the FLDS still. They don't think he had any relations with these girls that he married. I've heard that comment so many times. Oh, he just married them to protect them, to keep them in the work. And it's been such a blessing for him because look, so many people around their age have left and so forth. A lot of people believe that. Very few know he actually molested them, and I don't even like to talk about it. It was so bad. The things he was doing with them there on the ranch.
Yeah. Taken right out of Joseph Smith's playbook. The whole manipulating young girls. If you don't do this, God will destroy you, or an angel will destroy me, or you need to do this for the salvation of your family. It's all very familiar. Wow, how frustrating. But when you understood this and you realized, I'm hearing this directly from my sister who it actually happened to, your world must have come crashing down. You were back and forth doing everything that he was saying. You were under his complete control and manipulation for 10 plus years in your adult life, your 20s to 30s, right? 20 to 30. How are you doing with this information? What's going through your mind?
The deconstruction process it's like torture for the first couple months, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
To try to separate him from what is good. So, because we grew up with his voice and his teaching in every area of our life, even the things that were good, it takes a long process to separate what he said from what actually is good and honest, to be an honest person, to live an upright life, to respect other people. And then also the things that he taught that were wrong, like shunning people and treating them horrible if they're not part of your religion, especially your own family, believing everyone out in the world is horribly wicked and no one will be saved except the few righteous that are among the FLDS. So it's a huge deconstruction process that involves pretty much every area of our life.
Yeah.
Because the religion we grew up in had everything to do with everything you did.
Yeah.
All day, and even in the night.
Yeah. And this isn't
You
that
were
long
to wake
ago.
up praying, it's it's just an amazing process to go through, but it's very healing at the same time.
Yeah. One thing that I was cheering about at the end was, well, before that, you weren't allowed to get married. He was saying no one can get married. Even if you're married, you shouldn't be having sex. And I'm like, Warren, you are out of control. So you were waiting to get married and you really wanted that. And so when you left and you found someone, I was like, yay, he found a partner. So let's talk about that. How are you doing now?
Well, that was the most awesome thing, is that came about pretty quick after I left. Was one of the girls in the FLDS reached out to me on my Facebook and started talking to me, and she was willing to listen to my story. And of course, she started calling me and told me who she was, and things just worked out really well for us. We started dating, and then I proposed and got the yes, and we got married. So our lives have just been wonderful, and it's been very wonderful for me to have another person to deconstruct everything with.
Yeah.
Very healing for both of us. We're both so happy and we wouldn't have it any other way except we wish we would have met 10 years ago.
Aw. That's so sweet. I love that that worked out that way. I'm sure having someone to bounce ideas off of, um, especially when it comes to the deconstruction process from a religion that was incredibly high control. It's as high control as it gets, in my opinion. I've done a lot of these interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that's just so nice because you can ask each other, what do you think about this? Or is this normal? Or
Yeah,
what should
you're
we do
right.
about this thing? What are some of the things that you noticed coming out of the religion that you had to figure out a baseline? You talked about morality and everything, but just being in the outside world.
Well, the first thing I had to do was realize that it was okay to talk to people that had already left the church.
Mm,
And they weren't these wicked, horrible people that had lost their eternal salvation. And it's surprising to see how deep down that reaches into a person when they've been taught that for so long. It can take months and months before you'll talk to somebody that you'd been conditioned to believe was one of the more horrible people.
mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of happy reunions.
Yes, there is, and there's more to come. The everything from how you live in marriage to how you pray to how you put on your clothes. I mean, everything was controlled. And to learn that you have your free agency is probably the greatest benefit of the whole matter.
Mm-hmm.
You have the right to choose the way you want to go, if you want to believe in God or not, if you want what you want your religious ideas to be. You can do your own research and your own study, and you can choose. And God won't dump you.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, is there anything else you want to share about how you're doing? What brings you happiness, peace, joy?
Well, we do believe in God, and we know Jesus loves us. That's the way both of us feel. We really enjoy our work here in Wyoming. I do farming and carpentry. Jen's a good blanket sewer and an awesome cook.
Mm.
And the fact that we can have kids now is just awesome to us. So we have one on the way, and we're so excited about
Oh
it.
my gosh, yay! Congrats. That's so exciting.
It is. It's so wonderful to us because we both wanted it for so many years.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay, well, that about concludes it, unless there's anything else that we missed that you want to talk about.
I mean, you really could go for hours and hours about
I
the details of
know.
all this stuff. And
Yeah.
the hardest part to me is it's still happening. These absolutely insane revelations are coming out. They're reaching almost all the people in the FLDS now. And they're more confused. There's a greater grip of control than there was for the past 5 years.
Wow.
There's people moving around. There's fathers and mothers being sent away from their kids. So the hardship's still there. The control's still happening, and people are still being harmed.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope is somehow it stops. I don't have answers for it, but
Yeah.
that's my hope.
Yeah, we'll have to do another interview with you a little bit later and talk about some of that stuff and maybe some of the more recent revelations or anything that you want to add about how we can help people who are still in. I think there's so much more to get to.
Mm-hmm.
We're about out of time though, so we'll save that for another interview. And if you guys have questions for Ammon, you can put them down below. We need to do your Linda Listen moment, your sassy statement, as the viral video with the toddler goes, or inspiration.
Well, okay. Linda, listen. You can step out of the cult, any cult you're in, FLDS, other cults that are around, and survive that, deconstruct from it, let the chains fall off, and live a happy life. You can make good choices. You can be a good person without that cult controlling you. And you'll find that one of the greatest gifts you have is a gift of free agency. And I can't emphasize that enough. In my experience, my greatest joy is to now have my free agency and the privilege to make my choices in life and not have someone else controlling everything I do. It really brings me joy.
Yes, I love it. That was a beautiful Linda listen. I couldn't agree more. Ammon, you're an inspiration. Everything that you went through, how you're doing now, this was not that long ago, and you have already come so far in your deconstruction, and just being willing to speak about it so soon is also amazing. Thank you so much for everything that you're willing to do to help others, to give them permission to come forward and heal and deconstruct.
Well, thank you, and I sure appreciate all you're doing too. It helps.
Thank you. I hope so. I hope people can watch this, and maybe people who are still in the FLDS, I know it may be hard for them to find this information or be brave enough to watch it. But if you are watching, you are worthy and you are worth it, and you deserve happiness and joy and love and all of the things. And there is happiness, joy, and love on the other side, as Ammon here has demonstrated. So this was amazing. Thank you again for joining. Any other final thoughts?
I think that's it. I couldn't agree more with what you just said.
All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. Leave those words of encouragement down below. It means so much to us, to our guests. They do read the comments, and I love seeing all the lovely things that our community has to say. If you want to reach out to Ammon, he's on Twitter/X under Ammon Jeffs, and your Instagram, Mountain Valley Pastures. We'll put all the links in the description below that you can find him at. And if you want to support the podcast further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. Our newest patrons, Rose, Mara, and Brooke, thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to get some merch, cults2consciousness.com under the merch tab. We have some Apostates Unite. I'm sorry for what I said when I was in a cult. Break the silence, break the cycle. Lots of good stuff. If you want to come to Costa Rica, we are at a wait list only as of right now, but you can find that in the description. And if you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.